Hey y'all, welcome back. Today we're checking out Will American Patriotism Be Its Downfall? USA versus UK Patriotism Compared.
Every single day in school, every American child in public education is required to stand up and say the Pledge of Allegiance, placing their hand over their heart and reciting it to the American flag.
Not every child, I'll get into that.
When I say this to an American audience, there is no recoil, there is no shock, there is no horror. This is just what we do. But when I moved to the UK, suddenly I saw how other people might view this tradition as creepy, as culty, as potentially brainwashing.
Sure.
And it's this fascinating difference in how America perceives itself and its patriotism, or nationalism, as we'll get into in a minute, versus how the Brits I know go about expressing their love and loyalty to their country that's got me thinking. If you want answers regarding certain political movements, government decisions, or overall chaos that America brings upon itself, maybe the answer isn't in who voted for who. Maybe it's not in the two-party system. Maybe it's in the classrooms of 5-year-olds who know the Pledge of Allegiance better than their own address.
Y'all be sure to go to Girl Gone London and like and subscribe. She said every kid is required to do the Pledge of Allegiance, but that's not true. I grew up with a classmate who was a Jehovah's Witness, and because it was his religious prerogative to not celebrate that or to not do the Pledge of Allegiance, he could sit down. He didn't have to. No one ever bothered him about it. He also didn't celebrate birthdays. It is weird, though, that we do that. Anyway, Kaylin, tell me more.
First, let's do a quick rundown on how a love, loyalty, or obsession with one's country is expressed in the USA versus the UK before we dive into how an aggressive patriotism turned nationalism is potentially the seedy underbelly of the American system.
Okay.
In the USA, the following things are extremely common. Having an American flag outside your home, American flags outside schools and businesses, wearing red, white, and blue on patriotic holidays like the 4th of July, but also a lot of times, just in general, having shirts that have the American flag on it. Saying the Pledge of Allegiance every morning in school. Standing to listen to the national anthem every morning in school. Playing the national anthem before sporting games. Having multiple national songs that every kid knows. And I mean multiple. If you were to ask me to name them off the top of my head, I'd keep you here for hours. I can recite to you, My country 'tis of thee, You're a grand old flag, Proud to be an American. There is no shortage here. In the UK, it's a slightly different story.
True. She forgot America the Beautiful. This land is our land. There's a bunch of them. USA, USA, USA.
Story here from the jump, because there is the fact that the UK is made up of 4 countries, so we have the national pride, i.e. go Team GB when it comes to the Olympics, but then you have country-specific pride, so Scottish flags in tradition, or trying to keep the Welsh language going by teaching it to your children. Patriotism within the UK is often expressed when it comes to sport. The England flags only come out really when England is doing well in a worldwide sporting event, typically football. Perhaps people will fly the Union Jack in times of national crisis, i.e. a pandemic, or during a Jubilee event. What is decidedly absent here is endless national songs, any sort of Pledge of Allegiance in schools, or flags being flown just in day-to-day life outside people's homes. And there is history and context here. For example, the English flag, the St. George's flag, was associated with far-right groups starting in the 1970s, so the nuances of this topic are more complex than a short video, but the main point still stands.
Interesting.
But does this mean that—
Well, how many British pride songs are there? God Save the King, God Save the Queen, Ended Those Feet in Ancient Time, Beautiful Jersey, oh, okay, Hail to Bermuda. Maybe those are really popular songs, but I've never heard of them.
The main point still stands. But does this mean that Brits aren't patriotic? They're certainly not known for it, but I'd argue that actually in some definitions of patriotism, Brits are patriotic.
Yeah.
It's just that Americans are something else entirely. Patriotism—
That's an understatement, isn't it? Wow. Yeah, I don't think just because someone walks around with a flag on their shirt and has a flag outside their house means that they're any more patriotic, right? It's just different. It's just, maybe a little classier. Maybe something you hold in high regard shouldn't be something that you just wear. Maybe it's something that deserves a little more consideration, and maybe the national anthem in Britain inspires more somber emotions. It's complicated, I bet, right? all that American flag stuff can be a little tacky, and it kind of cheapens the importance of the symbol, maybe a little bit, a lot.
Patriotism means a devoted love, support, and defense of one's country, and if you get any Brit talking about what they love about the UK, you'll often come across these ideals. From the NHS to Britain's incredible contributions to society when it comes to invention and technology, to the gorgeous countryside, I do get the impression here that many are patriotic, but patriotic in a sense of a love for the place they were born and desire for it to thrive. Of course, especially in England, they might understand.
And a pride in the history, right? A pride in the history and your ancestors and what they've offered the world, right? Right?
Place they were born and desire for it to thrive. Of course, especially in England, they might understate it, and you won't necessarily know what they mean if you're not from here because they'll also be the first ones talking the country down. But when you read between the lines and learn how Brits actually communicate, my impression is that many do feel a support towards the UK. Again, this is a complex topic because of differing cultural values and how we express that, and I would argue that some Brits would say they don't necessarily feel comfortable being proud to be British because pride is something you feel in something you've accomplished, when it was sheer coincidence that they were born British. But after living through the pandemic in the UK, regardless of what the government was up to, you couldn't convince me that British people aren't patriotic in the sense that they're willing to band together far more than some other countries are for the greater good of each other and the country's resources, and to me, that is patriotic.
Yes. In America, I feel like the right wing has taken the topic of patriotism, and it sort of means an appreciation for the 1950s America, when things weren't great for everybody, but they were for a few people, and those few people want to go back to then. Continue the video.
Now, in America, many people are patriotic, of course, with a similar affinity for the US and a peaceful sense that still seeks to exist within the greater makeup of the globe in a tolerant way. But what most Americans would consider patriotic could actually be defined as nationalism. And this has a more negative connotation and is what is associated with some of the most horrific acts in the history of the world. Nationalism, by definition, is the policy or doctrine of asserting the interests of one's own nation viewed as separate from the interests of other nations or the common interests of all nations.
Oof. The policy or doctrine of asserting the interests of one's own nation, viewed as separate from the interests of other nations or the common interests of all nations. Yeah, that's not good. It's easy to forget that people in other nations are people too, right? It's easy for dumb people to not ever learn that. It's easy to let a government tell you that those people over there are not like you, but we all are the same, pretty much. Maybe, does she mean like turning the Gaza Strip into an American resort? Something like that?
I.e., America first. America only. Nationalism is not just saying, I love America and am proud to be from here. It's often saying, America is the best country in the entire world, better than all of the other countries, and we are only interested in what serves America.
Okay, she's holding the flag wrong, but also we forget that if the whole world is doing well, then America's doing well, right? A strong America exists in a stable world. If we just pull up all our ties and everything that we're doing in the world in terms of aid, it makes us weaker, right? Because the rest of the world's going to be more unstable and we're just going to have to deal with it later on. That's my view. At the same time, I guess I could see how America putting its fingers in all these pies is probably considered unwanted oversight. But at the same time, it's trying to help everybody. Or, that's what we tell ourselves.
And I'm not here to discuss political arguments. There's definitely something to be said for wanting your own home and people to prosper. I think every country wants that for their population, and there are always hard lines that you have to draw on how much you prioritize your own country versus helping other nations or being involved in global agreements. But nationalism can be extremely dangerous in two main ways. Firstly, because it does not accept the fact that we coexist on the planet with billions of other people who do not live in our country. When you aggressively put your country first, above and beyond working with others and working together with other countries to make the world a better place, you can come across as very narrow-minded and isolationist and selfish. But more importantly than how you're perceived, nationalism can be weaponized and easily used by corrupt people in power to persuade and get people to believe in dangerous ideologies. There is a reason that overall the level of nationalism in Europe declined after World War II, because people saw just how easy it was for somebody who preyed on German nationalism to commit the unthinkable, and with support as well. Someone who is simply patriotic, who pulls out the flag at the football game and generally loves their country but isn't overzealous, is going to be harder to persuade of any particular ideology than someone who has grown up reciting a pledge every day to a flag, who is surrounded by an idea that your country is the greatest and is conditioned to not question this.
Right. Yo, we can be patriotic and still not shit on the rest of the world, right? We're human beings before we're Americans or British or whatever we are, right? What would the priorities be? Human being, then nation? Human being, probably then family, right? Human being, family, then the nation, maybe? Human being, family, friends, then the human being, family, friends, distant, extended family, nation. No, human being, friends, no, human being, family, friends, extended, estranged family, work, nation. No, family, friends, extended family, extended, estranged family, neighbors. Then you see where I'm going with this? When you start to think about priorities, the country goes a little farther down the pole. That's what she said.
And again, let's bring some nuance into this, because I'm not saying, oh, flags are bad. I've seen plenty of episodes of Bondi Rescue, which is a really interesting show about lifeguards on Bondi Beach in Australia, to know that Australians also like a bit of flag waving, particularly on Australia Day, or maybe fashioned into shirts, hats, etc., to show off their love for their country.
Wonderful.
I'm not criticizing or putting forward the idea that Americans are wrong for loving their country. I'm American and consider that my first identifier when asked about my nationality, despite having a British passport and living here. I love a lot of things about America.
USA.
What I am saying though is that because of all the factors combined, American patriotism can turn easily into nationalism, which can lead to darker ideologies and create a problem quite quickly for America itself and the rest of the world. It's like being British, to bring us back to our comparison and contrast, having lived in the UK for over 10 years. Being British is something that you are, but being American, that's something you do. And if you don't wave the flag, if you don't say the pledge, well, then you're seen as not being patriotic, which is perhaps one of the worst things you could be seen as in certain parts of the US. Being un-American is worse than being labeled as mean or cruel or stupid, and so that's part of the problem. When the highest moral standing you can reach...
Yeah. It's funny, something that in America, people in power always forget that speaking truth to power, or contradicting who's in power, is part of being American. But they don't like that whenever they get in power. Suddenly, that's no longer American.
Being un-American is worse than being labeled as mean or cruel or stupid, and so that's part of the problem. When the highest moral standing you can reach is one related to how much you say you love your country, it leaves room for the bullies to not look as bad, because it doesn't really matter if they're not kind or compassionate when that's not the measure of morality that many are using. In school, I remember one of my classmates refusing to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and he was punished for it by missing recess. Many Americans would tell you that this is because it is considered disrespectful to the people who have served the country and fought for its freedom. But Britain also places emphasis on respect for its veterans and respect for the people who did fight for the UK during many wars.
Yeah.
This place is practically filled with memorials and commemorations. And yet, many Brits would give the Pledge of Allegiance a side eye. So it's clearly possible to show respect in other ways. I guess my main point is, do not underestimate the importance that Americans place on doing acts of patriotism. And in some ways, it makes sense as to how they got there. America doesn't have a long history. It doesn't have a shared religion, it doesn't have long traditions or lots of shared bloodlines. Most Americans have only one thing in common: being American. The entirety of the country and the immigration here was founded on the desire to be American, to buy into the idea of the American dream or the better life. From the Puritans to the immigration waves that would come later, being American is seen ideologically within the country as a huge privilege. And on top of that, in a nation of immigrants, there is an idea that you have to start building that shared experience in order to build the nation. Many countries within Europe have not had to do that. But to form a cohesive union within the nations, Americans believed that they needed to get people identifying as being American, not where their parents came from.
So you can see. Interesting. So the reason we do all that patriotic stuff when we're 5 years old in school is to make people assimilate to the system and forget about where their family's from. These little 5-year-old kids being forced to say the Pledge of Allegiance, they don't know what they're saying. They don't know what most of those words in the Pledge of Allegiance mean. They don't know what a republic is. They don't know what liberty means. They don't know. It's just a rhyme they're saying. And I'm sorry her friend had to miss recess for not standing up and saying the Pledge of Allegiance. That's bullshit. My friend never got in trouble for being a Jehovah's Witness.
So you can see the roots of it in many ways. It's just that the intensity of this mission never really slowed down. And it's this outlook that separates what happens in America versus other countries who are also filled with people who do love their country and have a fondness for it. Patriotism can be quite a wholesome thing. It's the pride you feel when your country walks in at the Olympic Games and you want your athletes to succeed on the world stage.
Yo, that's my favorite part of the Olympics. I've said it on this channel before, but in the opening ceremony, when all the country's teams are walking out, when the Chinese team walks out, they're all Chinese. When the Russian team walks out, they're all white Russians. Oh, that's a drink. When the American team walks out, it's all different races. It makes me proud. It makes me feel like it's like a movie, like The Goonies or something, where all these weirdos from different walks of life come together for a common goal. They look past their differences and they come together as a team. That gets me going. That makes me tear up. That's where my patriotism comes in. And I'm not saying other countries don't have different ethnicities. They certainly do. But when I see it, it touches me. That's what she said.
But nationalism, which is far more common in America, is a much darker thing that can lead entire nations into chaos and destruction because they're conditioned to follow. And because there's this underlying idea that they deserve to do exactly what they want without regard to other people on the planet because they come first. And to be clear, nationalistic parties have risen in other countries around the world. It's just that the scale of how it happens in America is much different right now, rather than fringe groups or a small percentage of the population. And other countries also have their own practices that many in Europe might find disturbing. Based on my research, Mexican schools do a flag ceremony every Monday, and it was popular in Brazil to sing the national anthem in school from at least the 70s to the 90s. But I would argue that we notice it more with the US because of its status as a world power. There is no denying, regardless of whether Americans feel like boasting about it or not, America definitely has an undeniable widespread influence and a dominant position in the world when it comes to financial markets, military, and political power. But the saying is that with great power comes great responsibility, not just to America and to its flag, but in my opinion, to the world at large. But unfortunately, I'm not running the country, and I'm actually not old enough to be president yet, so you'll have to give me some time. As always, I hope you learned a little something that might explain world events, and comment with your thoughts down below. Let's start the discussion. Do you feel patriotic? Let us know, and which country are you from? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
I do think the Pledge of Allegiance thing is a little creepy, but I never realized that it was because of all the immigrants and they're trying to get everyone to assimilate and love America. Forget about your old country. Never thought about it. That makes sense. I always thought it was more of an indoctrination thing. And, well, it is. It is. Yeah, sometimes the American patriotism stuff can be a little tacky. And the UK patriotism is more subdued, but no less strong, no less intense, right? It's just expressed differently. And then the fact that the UK is actually a few different countries put together into one kingdom kind of disperses the flag allegiance, right? The title of this video is Will American Patriotism Be Its Downfall? A year ago, I would have said no. But now, I'm wondering if maybe it is. Because a huge portion of the government is being dismantled right now by our president and Elon Musk. And they were elected under the guise of patriotism. But I would argue they are the least patriotic people that have run the country in a long time. It's all a con. It's all a con. To get regulators off their backs. Lower taxes for the rich people. So yeah, it might be the downfall. It might currently be downfalling us. But hey, it's all a big experiment anyway, right? So this is part of that too, I guess. Oh God. Anyway, this is kind of heartbreaking. But hey, if you're British, what would people do if you hung a Union Jack outside of your house? Would they think you're some kind of freak? Or would they just be like, oh, whatever, right? Yeah, I guess the main thing that scares me about patriotism in the United States is that we kind of forget that that's not the main definition of who we are. It shouldn't be, because we're all people. If we're going to advance as a human civilization, we need to recognize that we're more than our nation, right? People. Anyway, interesting video. I'd like to thank my patrons. I'd like to thank my Buy Me a Coffee folks. Thank y'all for watching this with me, and I'll see you next time. Later.